We're gonna be safe and sound tonight.
Hello everyone, and get prepared for this next talk because the title is Toxic Femininity and Matriarchal Collectivism. So to begin, I briefly want to go over evolutionary biology, specifically the point that women have evolved into a collective and men have evolved to respect the individual and to operate as more of an individual. And you can see this really in the political situation we have right now and throughout social media. Women live in a absolute fear of ostracism. It is their personal hell, and so they adjust their beliefs and they adjust their worldview to fit in with the rest of the matriarchal collective. Whereas men, we have much less of a problem standing on our own and criticizing the majority and changing our own beliefs towards that of truth and honor and respecting the rights of the individual. The Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Renaissance, they were all driven primarily by males and for the male psychology of individualism. Whereas the female psychology is inherently collectivist and has no real interest in the individual and actually has no real empathy for the individual, and they will sacrifice the individual for the collective in their mind. But when propaganda and toxic femininity get into the mix of the psychological collective, it causes all kinds of extremely dangerous flaws that don't really exist in the male collective because these bad actors are just kind of laughed at, and these people proposing evil ideas are either ignored or are dismissed. Whereas with the collective psychology, they can be very subversive, and they can guide the entirety of the collective to whatever ends that they choose, to whatever their agenda is, be it Marxism or getting rid of the First Amendment, getting rid of the Second Amendment, arresting people for thought crimes, massive taxation, property seizure, essentially civil war, basically. And they see no real harm in subverting all of society and destroying the foundations of the patriarchy. Because how could the matriarchy possibly be incorrect? How could the matriarchy ever be wrong, right? All of the women believe the exact same thing. So all of these people can't possibly be wrong, right? But the truth of the matter is everyone believes the same thing because all of these women are terrified of ostracism. They're terrified of their social standing being destroyed. They're terrified of their cushy government jobs, their white-collar, privileged feminist jobs to be destroyed, and for the reputation to be destroyed because they went against the hive mind. And social media has just taken this whole female psychology and really destroyed it, has really twisted it in such a way to where women are going insane because they see the likes on certain opinions on Twitter and everything like that, and they're drawn towards whatever opinion has the most likes, even if it's hateful, even if it's damaging, even if it's outrageously hypocritical. And they can't help themselves. It's part of their DNA to do this because whatever has the most likes is the majority. So they have to conform to the majority. Much like democracy. Democracy is extremely feminine. It's a very feminine way of viewing the world, and it's an extremely feminine way of organizing society. And so, if you haven't noticed, our democracy is completely subverted by oligarchy. And the oligarchy loves feminism. I don't know if you've noticed this, but they absolutely adore feminism, and they adore the female collective. Because the female collective will push their interests with a violent fervor, because if they don't, they fear the ostracism of their peers, and they fear the destruction of their privileged life, which comes from the oligarchy and it comes from the democracy. They have no interest in the empathy or the reason pushed by a male minority. They have absolutely no interest in debate or discussion, and they want violence, and they need males to conform to the feminist collective. And that's essentially what getting rid of the Second Amendment would lead to. It would lead to the arrest of anyone who dares intellectually challenge the matriarchy, and who dares ask for debate. If you ask for open debate, you are one of them. You are the enemy, and you need to be destroyed. So this is where a great fracturing of society occurs along gender lines, and the oligarchy is firmly in the feminist collectivist camp because they themselves are at the top of the hierarchy. So as the collective commits violence against each other and enforces the rules of the oligarchy and enforces the rules of the collective, then the oligarchy gains more and more power and more domination over greater society. So a lot of this is pushed by the media, it's pushed by academia, and sadly, women's inherent genetic differences and inherent psychological differences are being severely taken advantage of right now, and couple that with social media, and it's really traumatic for a lot of women. And furthermore, there is a very strong toxic feminine element to all of this. Sexism against males is a huge part of the female identity, and you'll notice this by the way most women recoil when another woman says a single positive thing about any man. They truly recoil in disgust. They can't understand that any woman would ever hold this opinion, because they brainwash each other into rampant sexism based on gossip and never really having anything positive to say. You can really see this reflected in their rhetoric and in what they choose to talk about, and just basically all of their writings. I've even had more than one significant other open up to me crying about the hours and hours, an entire lifetime of negativity and sexism that they were exposed to by their fellow women. And they said that, I changed their view of men, and I broke down their sexism, and they cried tears of, I guess, both joy and sadness that such hatred exists. And of course, it's never when men are around. I mean, because that would cause conflict, and that would cause discussion, and that would cause debate. And women are not interested in that. They're interested in conforming to the collective, psychology. And the collective psychology tends to focus on the negative. It tends to focus on the wicked, right? Because that is the most aggressive female force, and that is the most aggressive female voice. So this is what the collective is drawn to, and this is what the collective becomes. This also manifests in non-political ways, such as anti-intellectualism, bullying, the drive towards vanity and greed, and divorce and things of that nature. Because whatever the collective holds as cherished values, that is what all women will be drawn to. So you can see this manifest with Instagram, with women showing off their wealth and flaunting their wealth, and women completely obsessed with beauty. And look at the name of a mirror is a vanity, and that's one of the seven deadly sins, vanity. And this consumes women's entire life and consumes their thoughts. They drowned in neuroticism regarding it, and self-hatred. And this is because vanity is held in such a high esteem by the matriarchal collective psychology. Also, not really earned wealth. They hate earned wealth, but they adore stolen wealth. So they hold stolen wealth in high regard. And meritocratic wealth is seen as the world's greatest evil, which must be destroyed. You can see this on Instagram with women who clearly have gotten their wealth through inheritance or through spreading their legs, and they're showing off their cars and their Louis Vuitton handbags. And it's really about the feeling of the ego that woman feels when she has her very expensive handbag, when she just looks in the mirror, right? And when she posts a selfie on Instagram. And this is the female pinnacle for the matriarchal psychology, because this is what women have pushed on each other. This is the majority, right? So the majority is correct, and the minority, let's say, raising a loving family and respecting and loving your partner, things like that, that is the minority. So the majority is to be upheld and cherished and driven towards, and the minority is to be destroyed and ridiculed and shamed. So you can see why democracy and, in a more extreme form, Marxism is very popular with the female collective psychology. It is because they can't question the female majority, and they don't want to question the female majority, and they want to destroy the system of patriarchy, which allows for things like the individual, human rights, meritocratic wealth, private property, and things of that nature. They want to build a society completely based on conformity, on the destruction of the individual, the destruction of meritocracy, and they want to hold social standing and social status in the highest regard. They want to hold blind submission to toxic femininity as the basis of society. And every time this happens, we get communism, we get collapse, we get starvation. You can look at the communist revolution of the USSR was aware of these psychological dynamics and pushed feminism and pushed the female collective onto women to manipulate the men, essentially. And of course, none of it was actually led by women. It was all men who were aware of this evolutionary psychology. The Cultural Revolution in communist China under Mao was followed the exact same formula. And the Cultural Revolution that has been occurring the last few years in the West closely follows the Maoist Cultural Revolution, in that it wants to destroy all traditions, it wants to destroy gender barriers, and it wants to regard the state as all-powerful and crush any debate, crush any dissent. The Maoist revolution actually solved that problem by rounding up all of the intellectuals and murdering them, because they had the audacity to want to speak, to want to talk about what was happening. And this, of course, can't be allowed, and As you remember from a few years ago, the feminist movement was strongly anti-free speech and trying to criminalize discussion and criminalize debate. And the ultimate goal was Marxism and throwing male intellectuals in prison because they had the audacity to want to have a conversation. So if this is how anonymous intellectual males on the internet are treated, you can only imagine how a woman would be treated amongst her peer group if she dared to challenge the feminist matriarchal supermajority. It would be brutal, especially for the female psychology, which lives in absolute fear of ostracism. So the question remains, how do you approach changing and reforming such a collective if it doesn't allow discussion and it doesn't allow its opinions and beliefs to change from its strict, dogmatic, sexist, authoritarian viewpoints? And I admittedly don't really have an answer to this. I assume that conversations like this might help an awareness of history and awareness of the flaws within the individual and within the collective. But getting the collective to change itself is extremely difficult. It resists such change. It's almost the hive mind is almost a completely separate organism from the minds that make it up. But I guess I can't really answer that question about if the matriarchy can reform itself. I guess women need to answer that for themselves and for each other. But I don't want to be completely negative with this video or this talk. To give an example of a more divine feminine, I would use Marianne Williamson as a great example. She has a certain fiery soul that is not afraid to speak her truth, that is different from everyone else's on the stage, as she has done multiple times. She's not afraid to talk about religion. She's not afraid to admit her spirituality and belief in a higher power when the female collective is strongly in the atheist camp. She's not afraid to admit that the feminine can be toxic. She's done that in a couple of her talks that I've seen. And she's not afraid to put some blame on women and instead of putting all blame on men for the problems we face in society. So she speaks with her own words. She speaks with her own heart instead of operating out of fear and speaking with the words of the collective. So I have great respect for her and great respect for everything she says, and I would hold her as a positive example of strong women, and then I would hold someone like Hillary Clinton as a negative because she has this kind of a authoritarian, dark undertones, and she has a clear affinity towards violence, and the feminine collective also has a strange, subtle affinity towards violence if you don't conform to their belief system. So God knows where we would be right now if Hillary was president. I would probably be in jail, to be honest with you. I might be getting electroshock therapy against my will in some cold, dark basement somewhere by an all-female staff, except for the security is usually male, of course. But and they would feel like they're doing the right thing as they destroyed my brain, as they burned up my soul. They would feel that they're fighting for the matriarchy and defending the matriarchy. against toxic individuals, against the enemy, against the patriarchy. And I would probably be dead. You wouldn't be hearing this video, and I mean that with the utmost sincerity. So I guess I am a little bit thankful for democracy, since it turned the corner away from a very dark and authoritarian timeline, as the memers say. Is this the greatest timeline? I would say not yet. It certainly has the potential to be if we get our act together, and we get our act together soon. Maybe. So I'm kind of an edgy speaker, right? I'm kind of on the fringes, and part of me thinks that maybe I'm on the matriarchy's radar, and they're subtly listening with fear and with a bit of hatred and anger to everything I say. But my words still get out there, and they still fall upon some ears, and maybe some neurons fire in certain ways and make some connections. And maybe, just maybe, the collective will reform itself, and the collective will come to me and say, hey, let's move beyond the sexism and the hate and the politics, and let's focus on the science, let's focus on the problems, and let's focus on the solutions. Let's build Ancapistan.